York, where she lectures at the New York University. And she's also co-founder of Kosovo Oral History Institutes. Namely, she's a sociologist and policy advisor, policy scholar, and she has huge experiences and also multiple interests in the area of Kosovo, especially in regard to the humanitarian intervention and the ethics of war and oral history. Anna, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so welcome, Anna. I'm very much impressed with your latest publications. You produce like really a very productive person, and also your profile is outlined on our website link. But before I take too much time of yours, because time is short, I believe in relation to what you want to tell us, I would give you the floor.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for saying similarly to Luisa Passerini, because I don't think I am on the same league, but I take anything, any compliment is really nice of you. I took some time to go. I thought that the presentation was going to be in Italian. I don't know why. So I prepared my presentation in Italian. And so I took 50 minutes now to retranslate it from the English I translated. But anyway, let me start. I'm going to talk about some reflection on the research that I've been doing since 2015 on wartime rape survivors in Kosovo. I've been doing research on this, focusing on this for 5 years, but it is an interest that I've had for the past 20 years since I got involved in Kosovo during the war in 1999. And just listening to the very interesting presentation of Luisa, I was thinking about Kosovo is a borderland in itself because it's considered part of one country by different countries, but part of their countries. But and it's full of borderscapes, even inside, along ethnic lines, along the rural and city cleavages. And also, I was thinking the relevance of this because the Albanian women who were victims and survivors of rape during the war in Kosovo are themselves individuals who feel at home in Kosovo, but they were subjected to violence as foreigners to Kosovo. So there's some connection with what Luisa spoke about. I am now about to finish a book in collaboration with my colleague Valentina Kraja, which is a horror history of survivors of sexual violence during the Kosovo War, and we are in our first step of the approval process over the University Press, and I'm not going to say anything more out of superstition, but I'm very happy about how things are going. I'm going to talk about two things: why I chose this topic and why oral history is appropriate to treat this topic, and what I learned in the process of doing this work, and what I was able to confirm about what I learned from practices of oral histories and ethnography before I researched this. I already wrote about this a little in a chapter in a book that is about to come out on Kosovo and transitional justice, and also wrote a SAGE research methods case in politics about how to use qualitative mixed methods approach to understanding silence and voices of wartime sexual violence survivors. This is a very emotional topic, of course, and it's also full of constraints. I cannot show you pictures. I cannot tell you names. I cannot use any visual again. And also it's politically fraught. And I will address some of these issues later. Why did I choose this theme? And I said, the book I'm working now on is in collaboration with a colleague. So I cannot speak for her, although I know that she has lots of affinities with my approach. Why did I choose this theme? This theme came to me more than I chose the theme, because being in Kosovo and being around people who have experienced the trauma of war, there is at one point this deafening silence. And I'm using a cliche, but I think it gives you the idea of what I'm talking about. And I thought more and more about this after I read the book by Pat Barker, The Silence of the Girls. If you haven't, I strongly suggest it. I liked it very much. Basically, it's the story of Briseis, the slave of Achilles, the Trojan woman who becomes a slave. So Achilles becomes a pawn between these two men, Agamemnon and Achilles. And she's a slave and she can't talk. She's a spoil of war. She doesn't talk, or she has no voice objectively. But the book is all about her inner thoughts. So she speaks all the time in the book. So the book gives voice back to a person who's been silenced. And the silence of women who went through this experience, I found it in Kosovo. In reality, when I met people who were survivors of war, even when they didn't speak, I could hear what they were saying. Sometimes they would whisper, I'm one of them. But sometimes they wouldn't say anything, but just their downcast eyes would speak a lot. And so this silence, when you start listening, when you start hearing the silence, it becomes almost a text. And I was inspired by the writing of Patricia Lawrence and Women's Silence as a Ritual of Truth in Austen, Bronte, and Woolf. I do use the literature help me understanding this thing. There were the feelings and emotion and traumas that were almost intangible and they were unspoken. So when silence becomes a text, because you're hearing it, I could hear that these survivors were asking us, me and us and Tina, Margaret and Tina, they asked us to bear witness. And I also felt a certain shame that comes with our ability to avert our eyes for this kind of topics. I haven't been able to show my draft. I would like to show my draft to some of my colleagues or some of my friends for comments. And many of them don't want to read it. Don't want to read it because it's traumatizing also for the reader, because it's deeply emotional. But I felt here I was helped by Silvia Amati's writing on torture and shame. I felt shame for all people who don't want to hear about this crime, about the people subjected to this violence. So basically, I felt a responsibility against the oblivion of forgetfulness and suppression of this topic. Something that also what interested me also both emotionally and intellectually was the fact that there was denial, there has been denial, there is denial about the crime, the violence experienced during the war by women, even in their own community. It's a denial that is almost, again, explicit. It is the knowing but not knowing. And as Philip Bromberg wrote, Bromberg, let me pronounce it well, wrote elaborating Dory Laub's idea of knowing and not knowing is sort of knowing. So people say, well, we didn't know that this happened, or we suspected it happened, but since nobody talked about it, it didn't happen. So they sort of knew, and this different form of silence was, for me, a great intellectual challenge. Now, silence is never perfect for long. In fact, in Kosovo, after I said there's been silence and people don't talk about this, there is denial. Since 2015, at least, the silence has been broken. I spoke already, Irene, about this with there's been a great mobilization of women's groups, women's rights groups, artists. The fact that the president in 2015 was a woman made a huge difference. new legislation that provides reparation for survivors of rape as a special category. Civilian victims of the war has helped. So the silence is being broken officially in Kosovo, but I realized it was not enough. When one survivor looked at me and Tina, we're talking to her, and she said, you cannot write the history of the war in Kosovo if you don't include a chapter on sexual violence. So as survivors, they were not criticizing and fighting against the marginalization that they had socially, but also this historical marginalization. Why don't we talk about this in history books, in evaluation, political evaluation of the war? We have been trying to correct this. When I say we, I'm talking about myself, some other writers, but few, but also my colleague Tina, by writing essays on silence of women, transitional justice, and especially with Tina, we worked on an article that mapped rape as it was perpetrated in Kosovo during the war. That gives you a sense of how Kosovo was, how sexual violence was used as a tool of war, because the map actually identifies specific place. We've been able to obtain first quantitative data, not quantitative people, but having exact information about incidents of rape, where they happen, how the circumstances in which they happen, and what in the date of the incident, gave us a possibility to match these numbers and this data with data about actual casualties. And it's very, very clear, even a blind could see that on a certain date, in a certain place, there was mass killing of men. There was also mass rapes. And the two things went together. I said this is also a politically fraught topic. We are focusing on Albanian survivors of sexual violence, but in war, there are survivors of sexual violence on all sides. There are Serbian women victims of rape, and there are Roma women victims of rape. There are men victims of rape, but so far there was actually very little data on men, and so this requires a whole new research. And knowledge of language, repeated the research on Serbian and Roma women, but we really wanted to focus on this. This is one part. This is not the full chapter of sexual violence in the Kosovo War, but it is an important chapter because Albanian women were targeted as Albanians. Why oral history and life histories? Well, we interviewed women about their lives. It's a total of 20 women. I think we wanted to, one of the things we found, and the women told us, was that often research on sexual violence reduces the individual to that accidents, like their life is all that. But survivors, when we talk to them, were telling us, I wasn't always like this, so dejected. So there's a woman said, I haven't gone to the hairdresser for 14 years. I had dreams for my life. It's not my fault. Why should I be ashamed of what happened to me? I had other things in my life. And so we realized that even a research on sexual violence needs to include the entire life and subjectivity of these women. And also, again, here I was helped by Carol Gilligan, says, there is silence and we cannot hear silence often, but we often don't hear women when they talk. And they were telling us this, we want to be, we don't want to be marginal anymore. Of course, when we talk about, we thought about our history, using our history, we inevitably had to think about the work of Luisa on subjectivity emerging from memory and ideology. Alessandro Portelli is another of my gurus, interviews that produce meaning more than fact. We were not collecting facts of not conducting investigation for course, but trying to tell us stories. And wrong really conversational narrative approach. And I'll go back to that and to these 3 points a little later. one word now about our positionality. We were two main researchers, myself and Garentina Kraja, both women, so close to the subject of the studies, but we never experienced anything like that, so outsiders. I myself I consider myself in Kosovo as a Zimmel stranger. I am someone who arrives today and stays tomorrow. I'm kind of near to Kosovo. I spent in the past 20 years. I lived there for 3 years. I worked there. I have a goddaughter, fantastic one. I mean, I am, part of the society, but do not belong, obviously, to the society. And I have a deep knowledge of Kosovo. For some reasons, studying the KLA, the guerrilla group and their culture, I also had to study folklore. I know proverbs. So I actually have some deep knowledge of the culture besides the politics and all the rest. Garentina, and I'm speaking for herself, but she's also connected to this talk, is an insider, obviously. She's from Kosovo. She lived through the war. She reported. She was an 18-year-old reporter from the front line. She was herself a refugee. She was expelled by Serb troops from Kosovo. She continued to be a journalist, and then she did research as a young researcher at Yale on the guerrilla. And she was a special advisor to the woman president, Atifete Yayaga, in 2015. So Garentina is also is both an insider, but also an outsider in certain ways. Most of the people we interviewed were functionally illiterate. They just have very few years of school. They come from rural Kosovo. They speak dialect. Their idiom is very particular to the areas where they come from. So Tina is both close to them, but as part of the urban elite and a person who is a cosmopolitan, is also partly an outsider. Few interviews were conducted by a woman herself who was part of this group. And that was very interesting. I don't know how we're going to tell the story of these 4 interviews, but she directs a women's group. So she has some sort of authority although she's completely local, come from a village, she has some authority on the women she interviewed. And I think we have to, as we agonize, am I appropriating, all this? And I just saw that interviewers are always outsiders, and there is always an asymmetry of power between the interviewers and the interviewee, and we got to deal with this. But I wouldn't have thought more about it. What I found more important were the ethical issues. We need to find people who would be willing to talk. They wouldn't be re-traumatized by talking, and also people that we could represent truthfully and respectfully. I mean, those are the 3 things that and we discussed were more important. This is not as easy as it looks, because after you read Susan Bryson on the aftermath of violence and the remaking of the self, you know that you can decide that you're willing to talk, but then you can change your mind. There are several studies on the Biringona, the women who were raped during the partition war, and called Biringona because they were considered martyrs and kind of celebrated in Bangladesh. And there are stories of, despite the fact that these people were willing to talk, they're willing to come out publicly, and they were celebrated, they also found themselves to be exploited, even by the people with the best intention. How do we get around this problem? Well, we did go to women's activists and experts, because they were service providers to survivors. and not certainly not people who were improvising these roles for themselves. So the people who have been working with survivors since the war. So I've been working for 17 years. This has protected us from certain problems because we knew that the people who, the subjects of our research would be willing to talk. There will be also people already have gone through some psychological work. So hopefully we wouldn't re-traumatize them. And also we conducted all the interviews at the centers, the service providing centers. Was a psychologist at hand if something happened. In a couple of occasions where I was also an interviewer, the psychologist was present in the room. We felt that this ethical issue was covered. Another thing, last thing that I want to say about our positionality. We are sympathetic to our subject, and we didn't feel that we had to apologize for that because this is an issue of human rights, of women's rights. Sexual violence is a crime, so sympathy for them did not. I don't think we didn't think it would. Create biases in our stories. The bias is there. We are sympathetic to them. Luisa as Luisa was talking, I was thinking about what's also what were the connection between what she said and issues that we found in our research. So there are people who the person who didn't want to talk. So you have come to Africa, exploited us, now you want us to talk. There is always this issue. And where we kind of, again, appropriating, exploiting our interviewees. And I think we did think about that. But we already experienced in 2015 with the work that both I and Garantina had done with Thinking of You, the art installation that involved grassroots mobilization 1 month of Kosovo, and ended up with this display of 5,000 dresses on the Stadium of Pristina celebrating commemorating the survivors of sexual violence. We knew we actually could measure the impact that kind of intervention has had on survivors. Very positive impact, and I'm not going to go into this, but so we felt that even this intervention, so to speak, could have a positive impact. I'm trying to go faster because one of the biggest challenges was to maintain the anonymity that this individual asked us to maintain. Even though they're willing to talk to us, they were not willing to have their name revealed or the identity revealed. So we have interviews, and we cannot mention the names, we cannot mention the places of provenance, we cannot mention other details because we're so small that if I tell you that this woman comes from this village and she has 5 sisters, everyone knows who she is. So many things then in our narrative needed to be suppressed, and we had to go get around this problem. But an issue that was raised by other researcher, Anna Sheftel, working on the Holocaust and on Bosnia survivors of sexual violence, was, okay, we have the best intention. We want to hear the full life of our subjects, but then they think that we're interviewing them only because they are victim of certain, they have certain trauma, so they keep coming back with that story. We didn't have these problems. We didn't have these problems, and without knowing it, we were doing what Mary Marshall Clark's advised to do, to make a connection between narrative and medicine. If you go to the doctor and you talk only about your symptoms, the focus of the doctor will be the particular part of your body. But if you start with a laundry list of things that includes the entirety of your life or your body, even the framing of the doctor will change. So for us, really showing a great interest in the life of these women, from their childhood, their families, was enough to distract them from the focus on the trauma. Now, the last thing was how to present then all this material, which was very difficult. Now there is an issue, we're talking about language. These are interviews, again, with people with very little education, and they speak in dialect. They were all transcribed. It was very difficult for me to, less for Garantina, but also for Garantina, sometimes we had to work with a plurality of people to understand certain sayings, or they made sense and they were important in the interviews because of the dialect. So even if you know the language, it's very difficult was difficult and challenging to really try to give the emotional sense of what they were telling us. How to present all this material for us, especially for me, and I drag Garantina on this, was to follow Portelli's example in the order as being executed. So we created a narrative that is polyphonic, that compounds all these interviews, that follows a chronology, the chronology of lives, which is not just chronological, but is also thematic. So there is a family and the marriage, families as a child, and family, and then the war, and then silence, which is a big chapter because it's the aftermath and the justice. So it's I don't want to talk. Well, I would like you to ask me some question. I can say a few more, but let me just say that from this whole from all the material that we collected, all the interviews, what emerges is actually a really strong subjectivity, in part of women in agency. They know they are, I mean, again, all this needs to be taken with a certain, but they know they are, they know what they went through, not just during the war, but also before the war. Actually interviewing them on their entire life history, especially since we were talking about rural women who bore the brunt of the war. We tried to interview people who live in cities. Very, very difficult, because they actually are the ones that are more silent. They can hide this part of their life more easily. So it's sort of counterintuitive. So we always think, oh, the more the society is patriarchal, the less people talk. In fact, the women who are from a more patriarchal context have been able to talk more easily than women who live in cities, their professions. But a strong subjectivity, strong agency, surprising sense of self, surprising in the sense that the appearance of the suffering or trauma make you think that these women are defeated. They're not. And they dream and they stay, our children will have a different life. Except that, okay, there is a small bias here, of course. These are people, individuals who were selected with the help of service providers. So they already gone through a certain process. We're not talking to the most desperate cases. These are already people who have regained a sense of self through their work with the psychologist. But they're incredible stories, and we hope to be able to tell them in the best possible way for people to know. I'm going to stop here, because if you have questions, I'd rather answer your question if I've forgotten things that might be of interest to you.
Thank you, Anna, for this inspiring lecture that gave me a lot of reflection on my work with Italian fascist camp survivors. Uh, Before I break the ice, I have to tell you that another Urshka also would like to set you a question or several of them. So Urshka, you may start.
Thank you. Thank you for this very interesting lecture and presentation. And I must admit, I'm really looking forward to read the book. So
At least one.
even though I know it's going to be a really sad book. So I'm a Marie Curie fellow now at the University of Ca' Foscari, and I'm starting with this oral history evolution, because I'm not an oral historian from the very start of my research. But what I really find interesting and important is the role as a therapist of a historian in such cases. So you said many things about it, but I would like to ask you, how did you think that these interviews helped those people to somehow heal from their trauma, and like, do you think it was important from also this part of not only, of course, the historical research, but especially the healing of these women, because they had the possibility to talk about someone outside their, let's say, outside their home or their psychologist and so on. So this was my question, or my thoughts. Thank you.
Yes. I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know how healed they are. But as I said, we could measure some impact of going public more through the work done with the art installation, and because you could see how some of the women told us that they did feel empowered. For instance, there was one person that said, before 2015, when I had to go to municipality to ask for, I don't know, a grant or something, I would walk like by the walls, like going against the wall and trying not to be seen. And now I just walk in. This is a small thing, but it's something that came to mind that is important. I think for me, it was important to make this individual suffering as social suffering, because it does help intuitively to share something. You must remember that not all these women, but many of these women have told their stories many times to the psychologists. So there is already some practice. One in particular, I interviewed her. Garantina did most of the interviews. I did 4 of them, but one of them I interviewed maybe gazillion times. And she speaks about what happened to her, although not publicly. So she will speak to you if you meet her because you show sympathy. So obviously for these women who have already chosen to, so it's a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. If they've chosen to talk because they feel, it means that they feel better after they talk. So that's why it was important for us to go through the service providers and the expert psychologists, because we were more sure that there would not be any traumatization, and we hope that that hasn't been.
Mm-hmm. I think this is also an important task, yeah. Getting like really the people that can talk and will not be re-traumatized. Just a short question: how it was for you to hear these stories, like personally?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if Garantina is here, and she might want to say how she felt. But I can say, okay, I think for her, not that I want to speak for her, but being Albanian from Kosovo, and I've been during the war, it was particularly, and I know from other people too, she could have been one of them. So it's particularly emotional. Obviously not for me in the sense, I always felt that as sad as I felt, or anytime I felt more sad or more hurt, I started working more on the book, on the research. So I would just read more. So that's the way. I think this is an individual reaction, and for me, it's not averting my eyes, but doing more. That helped. Yes, it's very difficult, and as I told you, I did try to get some editorial advice from friends and colleagues, and it has been almost impossible.
Okay, Marta, I noticed your hand, but I don't know if it's from before.
But there is Erika, no? Sorry, Marta,
There
sure.
is Anna Ljubojevic, who was the first I noticed. So Anna, go ahead.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I have one question regarding the testimonies in front of judicial instances, such as tribunals, either local or international ones. So my question is, are any of those women actually witnessed in front of the ICTY or local tribunals, and whether they kind of talk to you about their experiences of, telling their stories, but to some kind of official institution, and how their trauma was afterwards either relieved or kind of enhanced. Thanks.
Yeah, yes, we interviewed the two people who there have been five witnesses at The Hague on this, and two of them were our interviewees, very key actually in the trials, and everyone, they all said that they really wanted to testify, and the thing is that other people wanted to testify, and they were not allowed by their families. Or one has this amazing story about how she was interviewed by investigators in the camps, because many investigators went during the crisis in the summer 1999 was very fresh. And the interpreter of the investigator from The Hague was telling her, don't talk, don't talk. So huge pressure, but those who did testify wanted to testify. And one in particular said, I wanted to see Milosevic's face. I just wanted to see him. They don't say that none of them says that they were relieved. They wanted to go, they went many times, not just once. But it's like when you see what happened when people want really the death penalty for those who kill their children, and then they go there and they live for that, and then when they see the execution, everything drops, right? And they're more unhappy. There is no relief. There is never any relief, whatever they do. But it was important for them to do it. And for one, also meant changing her life, because she had to, her identity was relieved, was publicized. She was they were all protected witnesses, and then she had to change country. She now lives in some other countries because she couldn't stand having her identity revealed in Kosovo, and that's another issue.
Yeah, and also, it's also very significant in case of Haradinaj. I would say also the question of protected witnesses. Therefore, not many. There were cases at the tribunal where witnesses also kind of denied and canceled their previous testimonies, but as you already rightfully said, that some of the witnesses were even silenced because also the accusations were changing during the course. So sometimes, even there were a lot of cases where sexual violence was at the end not included in the points of in counts of indictment, and therefore all the stories were kind of left outside of this institutional level of acknowledgement of the experiences. And that's especially painful, for example, in the Lukic case, where sexual violence was not included in the case, and all the testimonies were handed over to the tribunal, were somehow lost in space at the end.
No, I'm sorry, I have to correct you that you're right on many things, but Lukic was, and also he was absolutely convicted for sexual violence on appeal. There has been the two survivors we interviewed who testified, they testified against Lukic in the big trial. On the first instance, only Pakovic was, General Pakovic was sentenced convicted for sexual violence. And then the other 5 were convicted on appeal. And the court declared that they made an error.
I'm sorry, I was not talking about Lukic in Kosovo, but the other Lukic.
Ah, the other one. No, okay, but then but anyway, it's difficult to, this is very difficult. The protective witnesses, I think it's a shame that the ICTY does not protect its witnesses well. Let me put it this way.
Okay, now there is, I would give a word to Emina Zoletic, who also rose hand. Please, Emina.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Anna, so much for your research. I'm so happy that you've done this, and I would like really to read your book. I am a psychologist by my background, but now I'm a doctoral student. I am doing research on intergenerational transmission of war memory in Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially in Sarajevo, but also with diaspora, Bosnian diaspora. And when you said about silence, I am really interested about your experience with silence. Like silence as does all your women had such silence that you couldn't communicate with them, or it is like silence as like collective silence? So if you can explain me more in detail. Thank you.
Well, there are different types of silence. In fact, we should talk about silences. Also, there is collective silence and there is individual silence. The collective silence, I was trying to say a little bit, this collective silence in the society in Kosovo, there's been less now. There is institutional silence. There is judicial silence. Then on the individual level, there are many different types of silence. There is silence first that is imposed, and silence that is self-imposed, although the self-imposed silence is somewhat also imposed because it can be linked to stigma, which is a social phenomenon, or to, I can answer Erica's question that I read in the chat window. The stigma and also the silence is imposed by the society that looks at survivors as someone who asked for it. So in fact, one of the things I always say, it's not our fault we didn't ask for it, because people do say you asked for it in a way. Yes, and then there's also deep silence in psychological. You're psychologists. I think that every survivor of rape, but this is what I'm learning, because first I didn't understand why everyone in Kosovo says I'm not guilty, and I said, well, who says you're guilty? But apparently something that people also feel subjectively, because they do ask themselves, so why did I go that way? Why did I go out that night? Why didn't I leave Kosovo earlier? Why did I stay in my house? A question that people ask, why did I put myself in a situation of being victimized like that? And of course, that is not their fault, but it's something. So that also creates a sense of shame that and guilt. So that's a silence that really comes from inside. And then there is a silence that is imposed by the cousins, the in-laws who talk about you, and they say, oh, look at her, this is what happened to her, and the whispering and the so talking to Erica's, the bystanders, it's something that has a really deep influence on silencing women. And you have to think about most of these rapes were public. So again, when you think about society doesn't know a collective silence, it's really weird in the sense that most people have seen them, know about them. And so that's why it's really a process of denial more than, it's denial and silence collectively. So it's a long answer.
Thank you so much. I'm also interested how they speak or how they are having narratives to their children about this. Did you ask them about this? Because I'm very interested in how they are speaking to others, especially to their children about, or they don't speak anyhow to their children about this.
In some cases, the children were present. So, and that's another trauma. And in other cases, there is again this knowing, you read this, like we tell them how hard it was during the war, but don't tell them exactly, but they understand, especially when children grow up, they understand. But there is this very peculiar, if you don't say it, it didn't happen. So if you, it's the knowing and the not knowing goes on in the family. There is even one person that says, first she tells us her mother knows, then she made a mistake of telling her best friend, who is a sister-in-law. Of course, a brother now knows. Secrets are really hard to keep. And then she says, but nobody in my family knows. Well, she just said all these people who know in her family, but because it's not spoken in the family, so nobody knows. But the saddest part is the children who were present, because they have their own serious emotional problems now.
Thank you so much. We have Luisa Passerini who rose hand. Please go ahead, Luisa. You should unmute.
I'm sorry. I was thanking Anna for her talk, and I particularly appreciated the words on positionality, something we should reflect on more often. But my question, I'll be brief because I know we have little time, is about art, the role of art, and art as knowledge, art as intervention. You mentioned briefly the art installation. Could you say something more about this?
Yeah, well, in 2015, an artist who is from Kosovo but based in London had this idea of collecting thousands of dresses and displayed them on clotheslines in the stadium of Pristina, football stadium, as a way of saying, airing dirty laundry, double saying, and also we are clean. So there was this sense, it was a way of talking about the issue of sexual violence in the war, giving a sense of its dimension. There are thousands of women who were raped during the war in Kosovo, but not mentioning the people, but not having so. And the idea was then realized with the sponsorization of the president, a woman, and with the help of the women's organization. We organized rallies in every city of Kosovo for 1 month. So people participated and they donated a dress. So it was a form of participatory art that allowed people to contribute, individuals who were not survivors. And I think there is a very beautiful expression. Marianne Hirsch has written about this installation. She said, like, people took the trauma out of their closets into the public, sort of. Because the way it was constructed, of course, we used media to publicize this. And the first donation was from the president, who had to say something because it was also a photo op for her. So she had to say something. Everyone who donated a dress, every single person said something, said what the dress meant to them. that piece of clothing. And some people, it was very emotional. At one point I felt embarrassed because I gave an old skirt that I didn't use anymore. What people gave us the wedding dress or the engagement dress. For some people, was so important to donate something that meant something for them. And so for a month, we had a huge media coverage and the involvement of thousands of people. And then they produce also headlines in the foreign press, which is important for a country like Kosovo to be recognized from, I mean, for anyone, but be recognized by the New York Times, by the Guardian. That was important. And it really made a difference because, for instance, tell you another thing, there was a member of parliament, a woman who was against the reparation law, the pension scheme for survivors, because her party wasn't in favor, and she changed her mind. Also, the speaker of the assembly was now in jail, unfortunately, but he did come to the event, and he also changed his mind on the law on reparation. So that was important. Was very important, and I think it really broke the silence on the public silence. It broke the public silence. And that was important.
Just one word, a corporeal way of breaking silence, a corporeal memory, a material and corporeal memory. Wonderful.
Yes, because also every dress is a symbolic of a person, or a disembodied person. It was really an inspiration from this Alketa Jaffa Mripa is the name of the artist. Yeah, I mean, of course, the connection with person by okay, is his name Christian Boltanski. The connection with person.
Of course.
Yeah. And there has been a use of dresses, of clothes. Also, Patricia Smith that is really wonderful. The shrine to women in Venice. So that was important. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry to be pushy again, but I think we ran out of all the questions. I suggest several minutes of break. We start 22:12 with Nena. Thank you. Many thanks all of us for all the intriguing questions and very nice lecture, very heartbreaking in a way, but also introspective. So Anna, really many thanks.
Thank you to you. When do we start, Elena?
In a couple of minutes, because we actually extended the questions to the break, but we will have a larger break after Nena